All right, welcome back, fans, and those of you who are here unwillingly, which would probably be the entirety of my U.S. history class in igss. We've established how American slavery emerged from the larger African-American slave trade of its time period, and why the United States was really, in some ways, the perfect storm for race slavery to emerge. And I think that, for a lot of you, I've heard you already ask this question, leads to the question of, okay, but how does it last so long? How does how does institutionalized race slavery exist in a country that has the most protected rights of any country in the world at that time, has the most explicit statement about the protection of freedom, about the framework of democracy? So, that's a tough one, and that is a bit of an irony or a paradox we need to look at. Probably, we're going to have some central figures here, but of course Thomas Jefferson is going to leap to the forefront again, my favorite. Jefferson's an important figure in this conversation because he is the architect of so much of early American government and belief systems. And we do know that he owned slaves. He owned, in fact, 650 of them. The most famous is certainly Sally Heming, who has been proven fairly beyond a doubt had an affair, was a mistress of his. It's not clear how much of that was willing or consensual. You can see right here a steamy, romanticized account of her time with Thomas Jefferson. We really don't know all the details. What we do know is that her family, anyone who's a proven descendant of Sally Hemings, has received reparations from Thomas Jefferson's estate, which I assume is quite large. So here we are imposing a modern judgment on a cultural system from several hundred years ago, and that's really the game we're playing right here, asking ourselves, how did people like Thomas Jefferson how could they possibly justify or even rationalize or even understand slavery in the context of the early United States? Jefferson, of course, never gives us a conclusive answer as to how he could write that all men are created equal and own 650 of them. But we do have one of my favorite quotes here, the famous wolf by the ear quote, where we can interpret it many ways. To me, it says he didn't want to deal with it. And he captures the interaction of the pragmatic. He felt slavery was an essential part of our society, and the ethical, it clearly did not match up the standards of justice of the day. A quick look at the generations after the Constitution and the formulation of our country and the change within our country at that time shows that Jefferson was not in the minority. Most Americans found a place for slavery in their mindset. Many Americans did. And you can see while slavery disappears in the North, to some extent, the growth in the South and the West is significant. And we know from some maps that several of you, including Victoria, showed us in class, we know that this is about the new economy of cotton. And the correlation between the maps, I think, is pretty clear to us. Slavery grows because of cotton. And cotton may seem like an afterthought to you, but in the economy of the early 1800s, as Great Britain became better and better at taking raw cotton and turning it into textiles and shipping those textiles all over the world, quite quickly, you can see why cotton growers in the southern United States would find themselves sitting in a very sweet spot economically. Free labor, almost free land, a lack of any sort of legislation or regulation of their industry, and an eager market that is jealous of the geography and the legal situation they're in. This is, at this point, a tale of technology really influencing history, and I know this wooden box with some handles on it doesn't look like our definition of technology, but it is a world changer. It is somewhat ironically invented by Eli Whitney, who is also behind a lot of the inventions of the Industrial Revolution. He's also the guy who figures out how to make a rifle that you can take apart and put together in a couple of minutes, which is one of the keys to the Northern victory in the Civil War coming up, the fact that they could industrialize their weaponry. He patents the cotton gin, I believe, in 1793, and the effects of it are felt within the next 2 decades. You saw him on that map on the previous page. And again, I think it's a gap in a lot of people's understanding. Why would a cotton gin, change? I'm going to have to fix that. The cotton gin in and of itself doesn't revolutionize American slavery, but it allows for a quicker end point of production, taking the raw cotton from the field and getting it into as you can see here, a form that is acceptable to send to Britain or whoever your customer was. That would then increase the demand for cotton to come off of those fields. And if you could set up a system where you had more fields, more laborers, you were maximizing your profits, especially if that labor system didn't get a wage, only had to be fed and housed, and often in quite crude conditions. And so I think we can pretty convincingly say that Whitney changed the scope of history here. There are some people who argue slavery would have eventually been legislated out of practice. The numbers of slaves were dwindling. Only tobacco plantations in the United States were still using them, and they didn't provide that sort of boom that they would for a cotton producer. But not all Americans profited from the cotton trade. Not all of them had slaves. How could you sell the rest of the public on this idea? And this is the beginning of not the first and not the last, but certainly one of the most significant popular culture media campaigns in American culture, in American history. The creation of the happy slave. And this particular image is from after slavery, because this is an enduring image in American culture, that somehow there was a happiness to work, there was a nobility to work, that these people were so well suited to this work that they could make a good time out of it. They were so based on family, they were so prone to hilarity and fun. And this image may not be something that's familiar to you, but parts of it certainly are, and we're going to have to look at popular culture carefully throughout the Jim Crow period and up to today and examine whether this particular stereotype still exists. So justification number 1 was, these people are happy. Slavery is in fact not the worst way to live. You get your 3 square meals and a place to live, and you can have a dance. Well, the happy child argument wasn't enough to carry this argument for 80 years of U.S. history where slavery was allowed. There were a myriad of certainly related, interconnected justifications people, slave owners and the proponents of slavery gave. Another was that this was just practical. I'll number this number 2. You couldn't expect these two widely divergent races to mix. And you had sort of a biological, sociological take on this. You'll see in a lot of these justifications, we're going to read a couple of them, definitely a use of science or pseudoscience, and often it's easily taken apart. But if the reader wasn't well versed in biological sciences, some of this stuff made sense to them. There was another argument that this is just equality as we see it in all societies. Historical inequality is a reality. There are always going to be classes, masters, slaves, and it was easy to pull on Greek and Roman history here, great classical writers who had slaves, and to point to the U.S. as the least stratified society in the world, and therefore this wrong became acceptable in that mindset. There was also a group of people early on headed by Thomas Jefferson, who found genetic scientific reasoning for a separation of races. It's stuff that we know enough about that it looks kind of silly. But if in 1800 Jefferson's the preeminent scientist, you tend to believe what he says. The last, and it's referred to in this cartoon to the left here, the last argument, and one that got a lot of publicity, was that slavery couldn't be much worse than being an industrial factory worker and being a victim of the Industrial Revolution. And the slave owners were crafty here. They could point to the poor in London, the poor in New York City, the growing urban poor all over the United States, and say, is it really slavery to have people work all day and then let them live their lives, as opposed to tying them to a wage the way we do in the urban north? I'm hoping this brief talk about how slavery was justified in the early United States will connect well with a couple of the readings that we're doing, and specifically if you could make sure to read, we're going to read John C. Calhoun in class on Monday. But if somehow you didn't get to read the Thomas Jefferson reading that we read in class on Friday, if my plans went correctly, can you please make sure to do it? And you'll see on each of these, I put the dates on the Canvas site, so you'll know you're doing the right thing. And if somehow you missed Oleata Equiano, read him as well. So let's try to keep the connection of these little videos and our classroom reading together, and if you'll take the responsibility to make sure you've read those. And we'll see you in class on Monday and look at John Calhoun and why slavery was a pretty good thing according to him.